My name is Elizabeth Variety. Next slide. And I am a white woman with brown short hair. And today I'm wearing, well, it's a blue top with gray. I am seated in an alcove in my house, which is a little space on the second floor that has a window. Next slide. So welcome to our spring series of workshops, which is called Pathways to Careers. You are participating in the fourth of 8 of these career webinars, which will run through April 22nd. And today's webinar is called Doing Cultural Resource Management Your Way. All of the career webinars are held on Thursdays at 1 o'clock Eastern. They last somewhere between 45 minutes to an hour. Now back to this particular webinar. To make this experience more accessible to everyone that's participating, we are providing closed captioning. To get closed captioning to appear on your screen, move your cursor to the bottom of your screen and click on the icon. If you would like to ask your question verbally or hop on the video, please use the raised hand feature in the reactions icon, also at the bottom of your screen. Otherwise, if you are just listening, please turn off your video and your microphone. That helps improve the bandwidth, as well as reduces issues related to sensitivity of some of our viewers. We really encourage you, if you have comments or questions, to use the chat function. So you would click on chat, and then if you have a question, write the word question in big letters, and then pose your question. And if you have a comment, or if you want to respond to an attendee's question, feel free to do so. Eventually, our speakers will get to your questions. As far as the materials associated with today's webinar, you will find them on Communities. Eventually, you will see that we will have there the webinar recording. The PowerPoint slide deck, I believe, is already posted. The resources or references are already posted. And sometime in the next week or so, 2 weeks, we should have all the responses to the chat questions that you posed today in written form, so you can access those as well. Next slide, please. So we'll kick off our webinar today, Doing Cultural Resource Management Your Way. First, we will hear from Dennis Griffin from the Oregon State Historical Preservation Office, recently retired, and followed by Misty Jackson from Cultural Resources, LLC. That's a very cool name. I think it might mean crooked tree. And then after that, we will respond to any questions in the chat, Q&A, and then we'll summarize. So that's the outline for today. Dennis, go right ahead, please.
Great, thank you. I am Dennis Griffin. I'm an older white male with white shoulder-length hair, a short beard and glasses. And today I'm wearing a blue shirt, and I'm contacting you from my office, which is located in my backyard here in Oregon. I would like to share with you all today some insights I have learned regarding cultural resource management field, as well as offer some recommendations for anyone who is seriously considering cultural resource management as a potential career choice. But first, let me provide you with some personal history so that you understand where these insights and recommendations are coming from. I have worked in the cultural resource management field for over 40 years. First as a seasonal employee, then full-time archaeologist with federal agencies such as the Forest Service in the Bureau of Land Management, later the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Then I became a tribal archaeologist for a Northwest tribe for a number of years, and a consultant with a number of other tribes, and an owner and a co-owner of 2 different companies, contract companies here in Oregon. And more recently, for the last 18 years, I've served as a state archaeologist with the Oregon State Historic Preservation Office, that's the SHPO, here in Oregon. Education-wise, I have a PhD in archaeology from the University of Oregon. I have a master's degree in interdisciplinary studies with a major in archaeology and minors in cultural anthropology and historic preservation from Oregon State University. I've completed 2 student tribal internship programs, and I've been a research and teaching assistantship with 2 different universities. So I've done lots of both field work and education work, and from that background, I offer you these insights and recommendations. First of all, CRM came out of the 1960s and 1970s federal legislation that instructed federal agencies to be concerned with particular cultural sites that are going to be impacted by projects. And that required archaeologists to get out there and first find these sites, then evaluate them and find out if they're significant, and if they were, to encourage the developer to avoid those sites. So the fieldwork component of cultural resource management is the part that most people know about. We go out and we survey, we do testing to evaluate sites. If the developer cannot avoid the sites, then we do excavation. These are the fieldwork skills. There's lots of office work skills as well. These are less known about. The pre-field background research, the tribal consultation, talking to local informants, artifact analysis, report writing, publication. These are just as important. And really, when it comes down to time, half your time is actually in the field and half in the office. So one of the basic requirements that you really do need to have to get into cultural resource management is a bachelor's degree. But really, a master's degree is what you should be needed for, because to advance in the profession, you need a master's degree. It used to be a little different when I first got started, but now it's really a master's. A field school, I strongly encourage everyone to get a field school as early as possible, because it also tells you if this is something you'd like to do. You should have the ability to write. You don't have to write well, but to enjoy writing, because you'll be doing a lot of it throughout your profession. So definitely something you just want to enjoy, and working with others in a team, because that's what archaeology is. It's a multidisciplinary teamwork that goes the process down. So working in archaeology and cultural resource management, you should have the love of outdoors. Don't be afraid of getting dirty. You will spend a lot of time outside getting very, very dirty. So hopefully you will enjoy it. But what that will give you is an occupation you can travel throughout the United States and actually throughout the world in working. I've traveled extensively throughout the world doing archaeology, and it's a wonderful profession to get to know other cultures and other people. You should have a love of history and solving puzzles, because that's what archaeology really is solving puzzles. We find little bits and pieces of information. We piece those together to try to weave a tale of what once would have happened on here. Then we go out and find out if that tale is accurate or not. Another thing to know is the more skills you bring to the table, the more you'll be able to find a good job, okay? And I'll talk about the skills here in a minute or two, but really, the more skills you have, the better chance you have finding work. And that includes from being a field worker to being a lead and going on and having your own projects. So what cultural resource management does is it wants you to challenge you to find out what's going on here, and if those things that happened in the past are important enough. So you have an interest in a challenge. Your days in archaeology are never boring. They change every day. They're always of interest. So consider that if it's something important for you. Now, if the main thing you're interested in is money for a career, to get a really good paying job, maybe this is not the best profession to go into. You do make a decent salary eventually, but you have to work your way up. But really what this job is for is people who love the profession. They love to be outside, love that challenge. I would encourage you to do that. Now, I mentioned skills. There's a lot of ancillary skills that are very important to make you better on the job market. And these skills would include geology, soil identification, faunal analysis, GIS, remote sensing, artifact identification, photography, scuba diving, mapping, the list goes on. There are many things out there. You can acquire them through private classes, on-the-job training, workshops, many different venues available. So I encourage you to go out and check for them and be proactive. Don't expect your future employer to offer all these skills for you. The more that you have to entice them to say you're the best qualified person, the best chance you have of getting the job. So education-wise, I would encourage everyone who's thinking this for a career choice is to get a master's degree and to pick a master's degree where you actually write a master's thesis. I know there are some universities now that do not require a thesis. I encourage you to avoid that and really pick that challenge, write a thesis, and if you can, make it work towards field research. And I'll tell you why. Well, first of all, writing a thesis tells you, it gives you an opportunity to pick a problem, a direction, a hypothesis of how to challenge that, and how to solve it and to write that up. It's something you will do every day in the field of archaeology. So if you do it first when you have teachers to help you and fellow classmates, you won't be afraid of a challenge later on in your work. And why I mentioned the field research component is there are some states, like Oregon, where I'm from, that in our state statutes, it says to be a qualified archaeologist, which means someone to apply for permits, you have to have a master's thesis dealing with field research. So don't sell yourself short right now when you're trying to learn a degree. Do the field research now, so if you ever come to Oregon or other states that have similar laws, you'll find you can be qualified and you can get those jobs. You don't need a PhD to do cultural resource management, but if you do decide to go for one, that's great. But I would encourage you to go to a different university and a different professor on a different topic, because what you really need to do is seek knowledge from as many sources as possible, including teachers, crew members, tribes, and the local community. So don't be picky for one person. Work recommendations. Okay, your future job in cultural resource management depends on several things. First, where you've worked, how many jobs you've had, and the skills you have to offer. Variety is the spice of life. So the more you have to offer, the more enticing they will be to try to hire you. Volunteering is a great way to learn new skills and to meet local archaeologists and make contacts. I encourage you, try to do volunteering if you can. Don't always looking for the money at the end. Look for opportunities for internships, summer work, or helping with student projects with other grad students. It's a great way to get to know what their skills are too. And work for a tribe in some capacity if you have an opportunity. I think that the experience will influence the rest of your career. It has in mind, I know. And also the one main thing too is also find a way to share the results of your work through conference presentations and publications. Any job worth doing is worth sharing about. And a lot of the money that comes from cultural resource management comes from the public, from taxes and so on. So if they can't understand what you're doing, they will cease to think it's interesting. So definitely, I encourage you to think about trying to share your knowledge and to put that out in writing, whether it's a newspaper or a published report or a conference presentation. So that's my main points that I would like to share about cultural resources for me. So I've been working in the Northwest, Oregon, Washington, and Alaska quite a bit. And I bring those experiences to what I'm doing. Any questions out there at all? I think I went through that a little too fast.
I think we can hold on the questions for now and just go ahead with the next presentation.
Great, thank you.
Hello, I'm Misty Jackson. I am a Euro-American woman with long brown blonde hair, brown eyes, and glasses. And I am in my living room with a wood room divider behind me in front of the window so you can see more than just a silhouette. Next slide, please. So I asked Elizabeth, I said, what would you like me to talk about? And she gave me a list of questions. So that is what I'm addressing today. And it works well because it complements what Dennis had to say. So what kinds of tasks are associated with CRM? Okay. If you go online and look up the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966, and you look for the Secretary of the Interior Standards, you will see there are listed there history, archaeology, architectural history, architect, and historic architecture. It seems like architecture is very heavily weighted there. But specifically what I do has to do with archaeology and ethnohistory, but I do work with architectural historians. Michigan has started something recently that probably we should have been doing for a while, and maybe many states do, that the Secretary of the Interior standards have to be met for both the architectural historian and the archaeologist on a project that involves both ground disturbing work and above ground resources. In the past, sometimes the archaeologist could get away with pretending to be an architectural historian and vice versa, depending on the project, but not so much anymore. So I do work with architectural historians. I am a very small company. I'm often just me, and I pair with other architectural historians who are just them in their companies, and I hire crews as needed. But in general, this is what you're looking at if you're looking at the divisions, the tasks within CRM. It's not just archaeology. Okay, next slide. So if you go to this link, or just Google National Historic Preservation Act of 1966, you will see the professional qualifications and standards for each of these groups. Next slide. And did I really want the next slide? I think my slides got mixed up. That's okay. I will go straight to this one and go back to the others. So in the area of history, we include ethnohistory. And to briefly define that, it is history taking into account the Native point of view and not just history from a Western point of view. And so with this, I've also had the opportunity to do ethnohistorical research and work on a Native American treaty project. The specific one I dealt with was for a member of the Keweenaw Bay Indian community in the Upper Peninsula. And what you see to the right here in this slide is the areas, the treaty areas, and some villages involved in that particular treaty case that we did the ethnohistorical research for. This particular treaty case had to do with the right to agriculture and horticulture, which seems like a very strange thing to have to argue for. But if you are a sovereign nation, sometimes you have to pull out these treaties and demonstrate this to state and federal government. Next slide, please. Okay, yes, this was the one I was looking for. So the Secretary of the Interior standards for archaeology are these. Archaeology's minimum professional qualifications are a graduate degree in archaeology, anthropology, or closely related field, plus at least 1 year of full-time professional experience or equivalent specialized training in archaeological research, administration, or management, at least 4 months of supervised field and analytic experience in general North American archaeology, and demonstrated ability to carry research to completion. So you can see in this reflected some of what Dennis was saying about what you need to meet the Secretary of the Interior standards. Now here in Michigan and other states, in order to be listed as a qualified consultant, you have to meet these standards, which means you're not going to form a company of your own unless you can meet these standards. Now these are pretty minimal standards, okay? It doesn't really speak much to some of your expertise that you should have, your experience. So there's a little bit more information on that website, and it says, in addition to these minimum qualifications, a professional in prehistoric archaeology shall have at least 1 year of full-time professional experience at a supervisory level in the study of archaeological resources of the prehistoric period. A professional in historic archaeology shall have at least 1 year of full-time professional experience at a supervisory level in the study of archaeological resources of the historic period. So if you plan to hang out your shingle as your own CRM company, this is what you're going to have to meet. I suspect every single state requires this. I've not done a thorough study of that. Maybe Dennis can speak to that even more than I can. But it's not like you can just say, well, I'm going to get that master's degree or even the PhD. But if you haven't met these qualifications and you can't demonstrate it, you probably can't hang out that shingle yet. Okay, next slide. So how did I get into CRM in the first place? Well, I kind of fell into it. I went to Indiana State University in Terre Haute, Indiana for my undergrad degree. This is not a plug for them, believe it or not. I have no idea what their program looks like now, but at that time, we were undergrads and that was it. There was no grad program. So as undergrads, we got lots of attention and we got to go out in the field a lot besides just for the field school. We did work, we did CRM work on weekends and sometimes over the Christmas break or Easter break in the summer. And so that's how I got my start. That's how I got my feet wet with this as a field crew at my university. Next slide. And when did I decide to start my own CRM firm and why? Well, the first time was in the year 2000 while I was in graduate school at Michigan State University for my PhD. I started my company on behalf of a colleague who she was diagnosed with breast cancer and she had a contract with Saginaw Chippewa Indian tribe, she and her husband. Her husband is Native American, he's Odawa. So they were working for a different tribe than his. And when she was diagnosed, they decided this was not a project they could continue with. And they turned to me and they said, would you like to do this? So I formed a company in order to do this. Something Dennis didn't talk about much, and I'd be interested in hearing his experiences. Here in Michigan, you definitely have to build some sort of trust with the tribes. They don't just necessarily want to go out and hire any archaeologists. So since I knew these colleagues, and the Saginaw Chippewa were willing to work with me. So after that project was done and a couple other small ones, I folded that company to finish my grad degree and start my family. And so then the second time I formed the current company I have, and you said it so nicely, Elizabeth, you pronounced it with a French accent, which it should have. Most of us just say Arbrocoche Cultural Resources. And so that I started in 2007 after getting my PhD and after teaching as an adjunct professor for about 1.5 years. These same colleagues, they went back into business, and my colleague is fine, I'm glad to say. But they decided to leave the state of Michigan to go work for the Seminole in Florida. And again, they had a client and they said, Misty, do you want them? And I said, okay, I'll try this. So that's how I started my firm. I had clients handed to me. I don't know how common that is, but that was my experience. Next slide. So how do you find clients and how do they find you? Well, states usually keep the list of qualified consultants as according to the Secretary of the Interior standards. So whenever a client needs to have some work done, the state archaeologist or the SHPO, State Historic Preservation Office, will hand out this list and say, here are consultants. You can contact them and get some quotes for the work you need done. The federal government is also sometimes helpful. I have currently let my economically disadvantaged woman-owned small business certification lapse, but I will eventually re-up that, because when you have a small business or a woman-owned small business or an economically disadvantaged woman-owned small business, you will sometimes be contacted by the federal government itself, who is interested in working with you because of requirements they have for involving small businesses. Also, you can go yourself and find contract opportunities at beta.sam.gov. So you can go looking for them, or sometimes the federal government will come looking for you. Next slide, please. Sometimes you can market to find clients, actively engage for them. This is not really something I've done, but it's becoming more popular. I haven't actually gone out and made phone calls or emailed anybody. Social media is also part of this marketing push. Referrals. This is sort of piggybacking on that last slide, that yes, the Farm Service Agency actually refers people to me. Because I have done a lot of projects for very small farmers, and some larger firms just don't want to do that. It's too small for them. They don't want to mess with small clients. And so sometimes if you do a good job, you will get repeat clients, which is what you want. And then sort of under the marketing push, but kind of a passive push, is your own website. Sometimes people find you through your website, so you definitely want something like that. Next slide, please. So what does my typical day look like? Emails, phone calls to and from clients, contact with the State Historic Preservation Office if I have a need or a question, emails and phone calls to crew, colleagues, including the architectural historians, proposal writing, contract writing, invoicing, dealing with insurance matters and bank matters, all kinds of business stuff that's really not fun, I have to admit, and not what I got into archaeology for, but it makes up a huge part of this. And then report writing. And lately, a large part of that has been simply helping clients get the Section 106 review process started, just getting those applications started and doing initial assessments as to whether work may or may not be done, need to be done. Next slide. Also, sometimes you get out in the field. Again, Secretary of the Interior standards apply, because here in Michigan, you're not supposed to have a crew out in the field unless the crew leader, somebody in that crew has to be qualified by the Secretary of the Interior standards. So this is where having your MA or even your PhD comes in handy, and having lots of experience. And then sometimes some artifact analysis and other research. Here in this photo, I'm in the field. I am the crew leader when I go out in the field. And this is me with one of my crew members, Maynard Lockwood, as we did a monitoring project for a water main replacement in Saginaw, Michigan, and found a lot of really interesting stuff under the street and in people's front yards. Next slide, please. Okay, so did my work change during COVID? How did it change? Believe it or not, archaeologists were considered essential workers because so much of the work we do is tied to infrastructure and telecommunications and those sorts of necessary things that continued during COVID. So we did not shut down. Now, some field crew people said, I'm not going to do this, and that was fine. It's not really that hard to maintain social distancing out in the field if you're largely doing surveys, right? You have your shovel test interval or your pedestrian survey interval. So it's not that hard to stay away from people, but there were still some issues of trying to make people not touch other people's equipment. That was an issue. We dealt with the issue of travel by everybody drove their own car. Or if people did want to pair up, it was, to their own peril. We're all adults at this point and can make some decisions in regard to how much you are willing to distance from who on the crew. Everybody had their own hotel rooms. So it wasn't for me any difference, other than there was even more work in 2020 than I'd had, I think maybe ever, which seems strange. And in talking to colleagues, some of them experienced the same thing. Lots of work in 2020. I can't explain that. None of us can. We don't know. I think that's my last slide, isn't it? I think. Oh, one more. Oh, yes. Okay. So I would just have you consider, it was some of the stuff that Dennis was talking about. Just get as much training as you can, even after you get your degree. Additional training and certifications will always be welcomed by whoever you work with and for, or for yourself. The American Cultural Resources Association and the Registered Professional Archaeologists, they both offer various certificate programs, including now, I think it's RPA, Registered Professional Archaeologists, offers a Heritage Business Management one. They don't do it themselves, but it's through them, through the RPA. As well as an introduction to professional ethics and developing your ethical knowledge. And I really push you for that. And I don't know, we don't do my summary slide yet, right? I don't think so, but not yet. Okay. But in terms of ethics, this was something Dennis mentioned, and I just want to echo it. If you're in this for money, you probably are in the wrong business. We're not doing this just for money. And probably most of you knew that. We probably didn't have to tell you that. But money becomes an issue because and I've seen it and I've experienced it, and I have to admit I'm on the verge of perhaps filing an ethical complaint with the RPA. You don't change a professional archaeologist's recommendations to suit a client. I will just say that much. Your recommendations need to be based on what is good for the resource. And so ethics are going to continue to be something that will pop up for you now and then if you go into CRM. So just keep that in mind and keep abreast of all that. I think that's it.
Great. Well, thank you both, Dennis and Misty, for your nice presentations. Now we're going to move into the chat. And so I'm going to go back up to the top of the chat and try to get them in order. If for whatever reason we are unable to finish all the questions, because we continue to push you to ask as many questions as you want in the chat, we will answer your questions in writing. Just give us a couple of weeks or so and we will post them on communities. So the first question comes from Ambra, who asks, how do we best gain experience working with an Indigenous group? How do you suggest getting involved as a, quote, colonizer?
Let me try to take that first. I think that it's actually quite easy to get to know a tribe, but I was very lucky. I had a professor who was my mentor in my graduate work, who believed that this is back in the late 70s, early 80s, who believed we should be working with tribes. He was one of the only professors here in Oregon that did that. So I had a chance to get internships with tribes. So I met with several tribes, I worked with them on projects and gained that trust. And that saw me through the rest of my life. So you can do it through a university. If your professor works with certain tribes, try to make those kind of contacts. Also jobs. One of my first long-term jobs was with the BIA up in Alaska, working with the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. And our whole job was to work with Native communities to help them they identified the sites that were important to them, but they identified too many sites for the land that the federal government would protect. So we were hired by the tribes actually brought us out there, the villages, to look for sites. We flew around with elders. So we had a job opportunity to meet with and trust people. And it was wonderful to do that because that actually influenced my PhD work. I worked with an island off the coast of Alaska, worked with elders out there, and I just found it so fascinating that I went back to a PhD primarily because of that. I wanted the opportunity to work with those elders. So much like Misty said, when I started my first cultural resource contract agency, the work came to me. I'd already had a reputation with certain tribes, and they said, hire him, hire this group. So I had no more jobs than I needed to right there. But if you don't have that contact through university or for a job, let's say, I encourage you, if you have a tribe in your area, go meet with them. Call up the cultural program. Tribes are great people to talk to, but they want to see you in person. They want to see your face and say, this is who I am. And I'm really interested in your culture and how you think of things. And that's how you do it, is don't write a letter, really call them up and say, can I come and meet you? I'm an archaeologist, I'm working in your part of the state. I'd love to know more about your history and how to work better with you. I think they'll go a long way.
Dennis, that was a great response, both on the networking end as well as the internship end. Misty, you talked a little bit about your first interactions, and I'm just wondering if you have anything else you'd like to add.
Yeah, I just feel like some of this fell into my lap. I met Ellie, the one who had the breast cancer, while working as a student intern when I was a graduate student in the office of the state archaeologist here in Michigan. And it is her husband, Wes, who was Native American. And actually, he had worked at a CRM firm that I had worked at before as well. So I did know him before I met Ellie even. I don't know, I think you just need to get out there too. I think Dennis is absolutely right. He gave you the best possible advice there. But get out there and meet people. And actually, the thing comes to mind is there a powwow around? Go to a powwow, meet some people. You may not be meeting the people who are in their THPO, their Tribal Historic Preservation Office, but still just getting to know people and getting some trust. Yeah. I think Dennis gave you some of the best advice there.
Great. Sophia had a question for Dennis. What was your area of study for your PhD and your master's? You indicated that they were both different.
They were. My PhD was later on. I've taken large breaks between a bachelor's degree, between a master's degree, and to my PhD. So I had a lot more experience in between those. So my focus changed. And I mentioned before, I worked up in Alaska with the Bureau of Indian Affairs for quite a number of years. And I met this village on Nunivak Island on the Bering Sea. And that's became my focus. I picked one village, and I picked Nunivak Island because it was the last place in that part of North America to have Euro-Americans show up. So I talked to elders who grew up, the men in the men's house, the women in the women's house. They were 50 years behind acculturation on the mainland. So we had a lot of people with a lot of memory who were willing to work with us, or work with me. So that was a rare opportunity. I came back and I've talked to them. I worked with them for my PhD, and I've still been volunteering and doing other projects for them as time goes on. You develop that trust and you want to keep that contact. My master's degree was down much earlier in Oregon, and I actually was interested in how Native Americans deal with thermal springs. We have a lot of thermal springs here in Oregon. So I worked with tribes and history, trying to figure out the history behind how springs were used and what happened to them later on.
Great. Thank you. Angie has a question looking for tips for moving from on-called field tech to a permanent position. Misty, you want to try that one?
Yeah, I think that is a very difficult thing. Actually, for a little while there, I was also an on-call staff archaeologist for a larger firm. And, with the assumption eventually they might decide they want me permanently, which did not happen. And I did that at a time when there was very little work. So I want to throw that in there. If you hadn't already noticed, this is a very up and down in terms of the economy field to be in. 1 year, things may be going great, and the next it's not. And it's not necessarily the case that it's just going maybe badly for small firms and great for big firms. The highs and the lows of it can be for everybody. So directly to your question, if you can do some additional work for that company that you are on call for, that might, it might even involve a little bit of volunteer work, that extra push. I've had crew members who I didn't expect them to do some of the things they did for me. And it really got my attention. So, in a positive way. And so I would say if it's a big enough company that you think that you should be able to move into a permanent position, you might actually just go to somebody at the top and say, what do I need to do to make this happen? I guess I would encourage you to do that. And they may just tell you flat out, we can't hire right now for whatever reasons. But they may have some other, any of the particular companies that you're working for, they may have some other pieces of advice for you. But I guess for me, if anytime you can go just that extra mile, and I know that sounds like, oh, they just want extra work out of me without paying me. No, it just it gets their attention is what it does.
Dennis, any thoughts on that?
Well, I mentioned before the ancillary skills. The more things you have to offer someone, the more you will stand up above the rest of the people who are looking for part-time work or looking for work. So if you go out and know remote sensing, are good at identifying artifacts, historic artifacts or prehistoric artifacts, those are skills that they might be looking for. I found that early on in my career, it's difficult. They find lots of seasonal workers. Right now in Oregon, there's lots of jobs. I see more and more large pipelines are being built, large fiber optic lines. So there's more of a chance of opportunities. So the chances are not, the problems aren't finding a small job as opposed to finding a permanent job. It's more staying in one place. And that's one of the questions coming up here again later on is, I know archaeology often takes you in the field and often working away from your place of residence. So I think that it's pretty easy, I think, to find a job within a few years of work and experience to become maybe more of a full-time employee, but you might not be able to live where you want to live.
Okay. Next question from Heather, for Misty. Do you find that you have ample opportunities to do your work around the area that your family is settled in?
More so now, yes. Yes.
Okay.
A lot of it's not exciting. It's a matter of fact, some of it's just kind of almost boring, like the field work for cell towers. Okay, these are not necessarily big projects, right? And of course, it's like, what do you mean around the area where my family is? In a couple of weeks, I'm going to go up to the Upper Peninsula, and any of you who know Michigan, well, you know, there's parts of the Upper Peninsula that are far closer to Minneapolis and Chicago than I am. Okay, so it's like going a state away in some ways. So it depends on what you mean around for your area, but in general, I guess the answer I would say is yes.
Okay. Angie's question, do you anticipate oil and gas projects dropping off in coming years? Does renewable energy provide a similar level of mitigation needs as oil and gas?
Yeah, it can. It does. It depends on the state. Dennis can probably talk about this some too. I'm not sure if the oil and gas projects are going to drop off. I mean, maybe eventually. I just don't know when that's going to be. It's been interesting to watch in the last several years with the, you know, various pipelines that people have not wanted to go through, and see if that has any impact. But yeah, solar fields and wind fields in some states, those have to be surveyed as well. So yeah, but not here in Michigan. So again, these regulations are state by state. There are federal regulations, but states also have theirs too. And sometimes there's local ones that, for example, that's why California apparently is such a great place to work, because they have a lot of regulations that are state and local that makes for more work as well. But in general, I think until we're saturated with wind and solar, I think it does. From what I've seen, it can. It's just not in Michigan. Michigan doesn't cover that, and those have to be under state laws.
And just to clarify, you said that states have different rules. Does that imply, in a sense, that if you were to cross an international border, such as into Canada or into Mexico, you are not allowed to work in those areas?
No, I think you can. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. We have Canadian companies that can work here. I know crew members. You know, I had friends who they went to Scotland and did field research there too. But that's as the crew. It's like, you know, who was running that crew in Scotland was probably, you know, a UK crew or a UK company, I'm assuming. But it would require that, you know, you as a company, you'd have to know what the Canadian laws are to comply with those. And they, you know, a Canadian company would need to know what the US laws are.
Okay. Dennis, any thoughts on oil and gas?
Well, I don't think oil and gas are going to drop off so much. I think politics as they are, it's going to change and continue to keep changing. But here in Oregon, solar and wind power are very big. They've been going on for quite a while. We have huge projects going on. And yes, indeed, they involve a smaller APE, area potential effect, you know, narrower corridors for them, but still a lot of work, a lot of excavation. And I can see them even multiplying larger. Natural gas is one of those things that have come into the Northwest. We saw a lot with the last administration. Hopefully natural gas will die down a little bit, because there's major impacts to natural gas, huge pipelines, large areas being impacted. I think that might be at least quieted down for the next 3 or 4 years, but solar and wind power, I think a lot more jobs will be available.
Okay. Deborah has a question about reputable online PhD programs in archaeology.
I'm probably the wrong person to ask about that, because I'm not a real big proponent for online degrees. I do think they serve a purpose. However, I think I learn as much in my studies from my fellow students that I work with than from the professor. So online programs oftentimes you just see lectures and you don't respond to your students, and you miss out on that field and that personal knowledge. I've met with my students, my fellow students when I was a student, and I sat down and we worked on things, and that's how I learned better. So a lot of the online programs, it takes you away from the field and doesn't give you the same level of expertise.
Misty?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. I don't know. I don't really know what these, I have to admit, what these online programs look like. If, you know, included in that, they require you to, well, by the time you're doing a PhD, I guess you should have already had a field school, right? But yeah, and that's going to be one of my summary points is, you know, find a mentor. So maybe not a mentor, but numerous mentors. Yeah, fellow students. And I don't think there's really any substitute for the in-person. I just don't, I don't think so. I personally would not look at someone with a PhD from an, you know, an online degree. I wouldn't look at them the same as somebody who had gone and worked with people.
Okay.
Let me do something, though, if I can.
Go ahead.
Online programs are up and coming. There are many more. When I was with the Oregon SHPO, I see many more people sending us their resumes or looking for work with online master's degrees and online PhDs. It's becoming very prevalent. If you decide to go that way, for whatever reason you need to go that way, you really need to get the field experience. You need to get out there and work in the field before you try applying for jobs with a PhD degree or hanging out your name. I've seen a number of people who get a PhD or a master's degree, hang out their shingle, have never been in the field, never had a field school. They say they meet SOI qualified standards, Secretary of Interior standards, but they don't know how to hold a trowel. They don't know archaeology. Don't let that be you.
Okay, good advice. Chloe wants to know, do you know of any online resources for job hiring in CRM work for those with an undergrad degree?
Well, one thing I would say is in each state, there's usually a professional organization of archaeologists. For in Oregon, it's the Oregon Archaeological Society. So you have those groups that often have jobs available. They have posts, notebooks for things. And in Oregon, for the Oregon SHPO, we have a listserv, and we post all the jobs we hear about. So contact your SHPO and look at those listservs to see where the jobs are.
Okay, and Will has a somewhat similar question. Where are good places to find CRM internships? How do I find them?
That's a great question.
Yeah, it is.
Universities have applied anthropology programs. They help you seek those. Otherwise, I could say, I suggest as well going to the SHPO office, the State Historic Preservation Office, asking them where you can do that. But oftentimes internships are arranged through your university or a program, an agency will go to a university saying, I need people to help me out. What do you think? So all the internships programs I had were through the university. They actually sponsored those. Now, also the SHPOs offer internships. And I highly recommend that as well, because that's a whole different side of cultural resource management that you won't understand until you work there and see how they deal with things.
Yeah, our SHPO has student internships, but you tend to have to be, you have to currently be a student. It doesn't tend to be an internship that lasts beyond you being a student. I just briefly, I want to go back and answer Chloe's question. There are some online resources you can go to. There's the main one that comes to mind, and I know there's some others, but there's one out there called Shovel Bums. And that is for, you know, field techs. And I don't know if you were looking specifically for field tech or for something more, but even that should have some information. Also, yeah, but okay, you're talking with an undergrad degree, that's true. Sometimes jobs are also posted on websites for the Society for American Archaeology and the Society for Historical Archaeology. Those tend to be often, though, for people with at least a master and usually a PhD. So, but you can find there where companies are looking for workers and not not just universities. So.
And Jessica put into the chat archaeology fieldwork.com, some Facebook groups. So I think you can explore that. But one of the key answers seems to be universities and associations. Deborah has a question. How does one specialize in working with tribes with a focus on Nagpra? So first tell us what Nagpra is, and then try to answer Deborah's question.
It's a good question. It's the Native American Graves Protection Act. And it's a difficult question because tribes feel very differently about Nagpra and about the remains of their past ancestors than maybe archaeologists do. A lot of tribes that I know, or several tribes I know, have their own Nagpra division, and they do not include an archaeologist. They do not want an outside archaeologist involved with them. And if they do, they specialize in asking a certain number of questions. So it's hard to go to a tribe and say, hi, I'd like to work with your dead. I mean, if you understand that, it's very insensitive to them. So I would say you can work with a tribe with those skills of being a fallen remains and human remains, but they would want to reach out to you, I think, in order to incorporate your use for fallen remains. I would say it's better to work with a different contracting firm and who works with tribes so that you're contracted that way. We have people who specialize in Nagpra, work with some firms that the police would use. And then the tribes, when human remains are found eroding from the bank of a river, let's say, or the ocean, they contact those agencies because they know they're sensitive. But it's hard to come to a tribe without having that trust already built up and trying to get into Nagpra.
Yeah. Sometimes tribes will post on something like Indeed.com, believe it or not. Sometimes they will use those sorts of just regular job posting sites to advertise for, sometimes for a THPO, Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, or a Nagpra. So I have seen that. Even if you might not manage to get in with a tribe, sometimes museums are looking for Nagpra coordinators. So you would then, more than tangentially, I mean, you're still going to be working with a tribe, even if you're not working as in getting paid by the tribe, you're working for some other museum or organization. So yeah, just keep your eye out again on where museums post their jobs too.
Okay. I think we're not going to have too much more time for questions, but let's try to get through one or two others. Sophia wonders, how helpful is GPR training for starting off in CRM? And please define what GPR is.
Ground penetrating radar.
Ground penetrating radar.
Yes,
okay.
To have, however, if you're just starting off on CRM, unless you have your own unit to offer them, a lot of archaeologists are still learning how important GPR and other remote sensing technologies are. So it's great to say that's a skill you have, and that way they might hire you because of your other skills, and that when they need to. If a firm has GPR, they have the equipment already, and they say, oh, let's hire so-and-so too, because that way we've got a fallback to do that. But just having that as your main skill, if you don't have your own equipment, it probably won't be a big seller. That's my feeling. Yeah,
I agree. Yeah, because there's firms out there that you can go to and hire them specifically for that. And I don't know that I want to say that the market is saturated in that, but yeah, I agree with Dennis on that one.
Okay, and one last question from Laura. What resources do you draw on for your research, both for planning your work on site and also while writing your reports?
So I'm not sure what Laura's asking about, what resources. I believe, I'm a strong believer in in-depth background research for learning about an area before you go into the area. So early General Land Office survey maps from the BLM has those. Primary documents. I do not think Wikipedia is a source that one should use, and I see it referencing in reports, and like that's not where you go. You go for primary reports. So while the laws are very important, and federal documents definitely, you really need to learn learned how to search a library research to find out what's going on out there. And there are documents out there. I think I put some maybe in my guidelines for things to look for bibliography. But I'll try to think about more and maybe to add later on when we have answers to this question. Misty, do you have any idea?
I can't imagine doing anything that we do without a USGS map. And I use the ones that they call them all historic now, even if they're from 1983 or whatever. But yeah, USGS maps as far back as you can get and up to the present, whatever. Library collections, there's so much stuff online now. There's, Hattie Trust, you can get, really old documents and books and stuff on that. So there's a lot of stuff online now. You don't have to necessarily go to archives. But yeah, histories and archaeological reports and we've got bookshelves full of, well, Dennis has bookshelves full of books behind him of stuff that he uses, I see. So yeah, so treaties, if you're doing treaty research, absolutely. And I think it is important to know for writing background histories for your reports, you got to know when, treaties were signed, that sort of thing. If you can think of it, you can probably use it.
And one thing you can see is the SHPO, like our SHPO here in Oregon, we have scanned our entire library of over 34,000 publications, and they're all online for archaeologists to access. So if you are looking at an area, the past reports are online for you. And plus you can see some of the background and look at their bibliography to get stuff. That's more for people with a master's degree already, but at least you know it's there.
And both of our speakers have put some resources into the reference list, which you will find on communities. So for those of you whose questions we didn't get to, there's still quite a few. We will respond to those. Just give us a couple of weeks and we will post them on communities. Next slide, please. So let's just summarize what our speakers have talked to us about today. First of all, CRM can be done with a BA or BS degree, but a master's degree enables you to progress in the field. A second point, only about 1/2 of the tasks of CRM involve working outside. The rest of the time, you're busy gathering research, analyzing it, and writing up reports. And a third point is that you really need a curiosity about history, an ability to put pieces together based on clues from the past, and a willingness to admit that if your initial hypothesis did not hold, you're willing to go back into the field and focus on some other stream of thought. Next slide. And for those of you who are just really starting out, get as much experience in the field as you can. Also demonstrate that you are good at writing, because both of those skills are really needed. Number 2, continue to get new certifications, including certifications on ethics. CRM is not just about money. And finally, find a mentor, even if it means volunteering. There are mentoring programs that exist. For example, within the American Anthropological Association, NAPA, which represents the practice of anthropology, NAPA has a very old mentor program. And if you contact them, they might be able to help you, pair you with someone who knows about the kinds of things you're looking to know about. Next slide. So just in closing, we will be sending all of you an evaluation of this webinar. Please fill it out. It really helps us to improve the quality of the webinars in the future. See the postings that we've already mentioned on communities, and register for our other career webinars in the spring series. Next one. So we still have 4 more, the next one being in tech. But for those of you interested in archaeology, you will not want to miss April 15th or April 22nd, both of which feature archaeologists. And then April 8th is about careers in government, both at the state level and federal level. So we hope to see you at another webinar. Thank you so much for your attention. And Dennis and Misty, thank you for your time and efforts in making this possible. And thank you to the AAA staff, Gabby Dunkley, Scott Hall, Jeff Martin, Nell Knesny, Sean Eiffel, and Daniel Ginsberg. Thank you so much.